So I'm Josh Nerius. I'm a developer evangelist at ServiceNow. I've been here I guess in November will be 4 years. And before I was at ServiceNow, I was a customer. So I started out at a large financial services company. I was there for a number of years, building a variety of apps. I actually have a background in full stack development. So there was a period of time where building an app for me meant starting with bare metal and going all the way up the stack. So I started working with ServiceNow about 5 years ago and liked it so much that I came to work for ServiceNow, and I've been here since then. So I'm just going to jump right into the demo. I had a little bit more preamble, but we've got a lot to get through. And today I'm going to build an app in the next 35, 40 minutes from start to finish. And we're going to create the application. What we've done is we've selected an app that we think represents what a lot of developers will go through. It really touches a cross-section of a lot of the developer tools on the platform. So the app that we've chosen is a non-IT app. We actually chose to build this thing we're calling the Rental Property Manager. And the Rental Property Management application, really, it's got a couple of personas that would interact with it. So you have potentially a tenant who would want to be a client, and they might go and apply to rent a property. You would have property managers as well as landlords who might want to then administer or do sort of management things, approve applications, and that sort of stuff. And before I actually build it, I'm just going to show what the finished product looks like so we can kind of see where we're going and kind of visualize what it is, the steps that we're taking to get here. So this is the end user view. This is the rental property homepage. This is, we can see we've got an interactive Google map. We have a plot of the various properties that we have in here. I can search. I'm actually from Chicago, which is why you see this here. And all of those sample properties are definitely not the bars in my neighborhood. Just had to find some sample data of some kind or another. So we can actually browse through this. We can see information about the properties. I could click on one of these, and if it's available, I can click apply. I can fill out a form and actually apply for this particular property. So this is sort of the end user view, and we're going to get into actually applying as I build the app, so I'm not going to go through that now. And then really the fulfillment interface, so the interface for the property manager, they can come in here and they can see things like what are the rental properties that I have and how can I administer that data? Can I set the price? Can I set the credit score approval cutoffs and limits and that sort of thing? So this is what we're going to build. And with that, I'm going to stop showing you the finished version and we're just going to go and build it from scratch. So let me go ahead and actually I do have one slide. And it's not a very interesting slide and PowerPoint makes me sad, so we're not going to stay here very long. But roughly, this is what we're doing. We're going to start with the data model. We want to think about what's the data we want to store. So we want to store information about rental properties and applications. We need to think about business logic. So how do I actually automate the workflow and deal with approvals and things like that? We're going to look a little bit in integration. So how do we get data in? How do we, in real time, update properties and things like that? And then finally, the user interface. How do we actually build out the components that I just showed you a moment ago? So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go into Studio. Studio is the IDE for developers in ServiceNow. So this is really the central place that you can come when you build an app. And so I'm going to click Create Application. I'm going to start from scratch. We actually have some other templates here as well that you could sort of bootstrap an application, but I'm starting from zero. We're going to call this thing Rental Property Manager, and you can see from the fact that it's auto-completing, I've not practiced this before in this instance. So let's go ahead and click Create. And so now we have, this is Studio. This is an empty app. There's nothing here. On the left-hand side, we have the Application Explorer, which is where all of our artifacts are going to be. And I'm just going to start building a table. So I click Create Application File. This brings up our interface where we can see the various things that we can build. So anything from data model, forms and UI, scripts, and whatnot. And I'm just going to create a table. I'm going to call this thing Rental Property. And we're going to put this thing in a new menu called Rental Property Manager. Now, one of the things I want to call attention to here is as I'm doing this, I'm not worrying about setting up a database or coming up with DDLs or thinking too much about database schema. I just know that I want to store rental properties. I know that I have a bunch of attributes that I want to store about it. And so I'm just going to start building that out. So the first thing is we want an address. This is going to be a string field.
Can folks see that okay? Yeah? Okay.
Okay.
Good enough.
Good deal. Yeah, we had a screen resolution change, so this is, if we need to zoom it up, let me know. So we have an address that's a string field. We want to store some things about, credit score, so we have this thing we're going to call the credit score approval limit. This is an integer, and you'll see as I'm building these that, it's easy to select the different kinds of data types that we might want to store. Got our credit score cutoff. And this part's the boring part. So unfortunately, every field that I'm creating is something we use later. So you're going to have to watch me type it. We're going to create this thing called landlord. And this is interesting because this is a reference field. This is going to allow us to establish a link to another table in the system. So Jonathan had talked about sort of the shared data model. We already have a user table, and this is the same user table that every application uses. So we've created a link to that table. We've established referential integrity with that table, and we'll see how that comes into play as I continue to build. Same thing for location. So we actually want to store a reference to a location record. And this is how we get things like latitude. And talking and typing at the same time is, oh, there we go. It's always fun. We're going to go to the location table. We got monthly rent. This is a currency field. And currency has various properties about it, like the ability to convert between currencies and that sort of thing. We want to track, does this thing have parking or not? This is going to be true or false. So this is a Boolean field. It's going to show up as a checkbox. And then the same thing with, we're going to track whether or not the building has shared entry. Go ahead and scroll a bit there. Property manager, our final reference field that we're going to create. And this is again going to go back to that same user table that is already in the platform. And then two drop downs. We call these choice fields. So status, and then type. So what kind of property is this? So this is roughly the data model. This is what I want to keep track of in terms of rental properties. So I'm going to save this. And what's happening behind the scenes is ServiceNow is taking care of the process of actually creating the table. It's establishing the things in the database in the back end. And looking at this from the standpoint of, I have a background in application development. If you didn't, you really just need to know what is the information I want to store. Now that we've created that, we can see that all of the artifacts we're creating are collected on the left. So as a developer, I can come in here and I can see everything that I've generated, whether it was directly or indirectly. So we can see that ServiceNow auto-generated some roles and access controls. These are things that allow us to control who can actually read the data in those tables. We can assign a role to a user to say that this user has access to the rental property application, that sort of thing. And the next thing I want to look at is how can I actually interact with this table? So I'm going to go back to the main user interface. I'm going to refresh, and I'm going to look in our application navigator, and you see we now have a rental property manager application. And if I click on rental properties, we've got a default list. And if I click new, we have a default form. And I can, right off the bat, start actually saving records. And the interesting thing about this is I haven't written any additional logic. I haven't gone out there and created CRUD operations. I haven't really done anything to get to this point. This just comes with the fact that I built an application. I can actually create and interact with records. But the next thing is this isn't necessarily how we want it to look, so we want to customize that a bit. So I'm going to actually open up the form for this property and move things around. So I can drag fields to where I want them to be. We actually need to specify some things, so we created some drop-downs, but we didn't actually create any values in those drop-downs. So I'm going to create some choices for the type. We're going to track apartments. We're going to track single-family homes. And what's the third one? We want to track townhomes. And then for the status, we want to keep track of, is it occupied or is it empty? And we don't need that third one, so we'll get rid of it. Just move a couple more things around here. And in the interest of time, I'm going to probably not try to make this quite perfect, but let's go ahead and take a look. So we'll reload the form. We can see just by dragging those things around, stuff is where we want it to be. And we also have our drop-downs now, so we can select the type, we can select the status and whatnot. The other thing I want to call attention to here is we define those reference fields. And so you see these here, and without creating any code to go and do lookups or anything like that, we're automatically able to start establishing references to existing data in the platform. So I can select the location, I can select the landlord. If I hover over these things, we can see information about that. This is just kind of what comes with the fact that we're using reference fields. So
if I need to do something more complex, like restrict a user from being able to see landlords outside of his region or something like that? Is that something you do under the covers through a customization? Or you don't have to show me anything.
Yeah, no, that's completely fair. So that's something that actually is not difficult to do at all. So there were a set of default roles that were generated, and right now those basically say, if you have access to the application, you can see everything. But I can create conditions on those. So I could say, does the current user belong to a certain department, or do they report to a particular person? And that's really just a matter of defining a condition. We'll actually define some other conditions that look similar to what that would look like.
Okay.
But it's not a customization. It's really just a configuration of continuing to build out your security model. So with that, the other things that I want to do here is this form. We actually want to make this form dynamic, and we've decided that if we select a single-family home, we don't want a shared entry checkbox. It just kind of doesn't jive. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a UI policy. UI policies allow us to control the form and how the form renders based on some set of conditions or values. So I'm going to create a UI policy on the rental property table. I'm going to say hide shared entry for single-family homes. And then this is one of those condition builders that I was talking about, where I can say when the type is, and then this is dynamically filled out based on the choices. So when the type is single-family home, this UI policy is going to run. And then I need to define the action. So what do I actually want to do? And so I'm going to say, go to the shared entry field and set visible to false. I'll submit that. And now what's going to happen is, let me go ahead and reload the form. When I select type of single-family home, the shared entry checkbox goes away. I select something else, the shared entry checkbox comes back. So we're dynamically morphing the form. We're doing things. I'm not writing code to do it. I'm just kind of configuring stuff and choosing some natural language condition builders to get there. So at this point, we've got the ability to track rental properties. And I don't want to make you watch me type in a whole bunch of these, but we actually need some demo data to work with. So I'm going to import some stuff using what we call easy import. This allows us to take an Excel spreadsheet. So actually, let me just show you a quick preview of what the data looks like. So this is a standard spreadsheet. It's got a couple of columns, column headers, and each of these headers matches the fields in the table that I created a moment ago. So I'm going to select that and import it. And this is actually something that's really interesting. So, in some of the things that actually happened faster, I had things to say, and now I don't have time to say them. So we can actually see the data there. We can preview it before we apply it. And I'm going to go ahead and complete the import. And we've successfully brought those rental properties in. And this is something that, depending on the system, in other applications I've built in the past, or things that, this is getting legacy data in is hard. And it's not always this easy. Obviously, if you have things to transform or whatever else, we provide tools to do that as well. But this is extremely easy to get the data bootstrapped. So now that we've got rental properties, we actually want to start tracking rental applications. So I'm going to create another table. And this is a table with a twist. It's going to have some new functionality that we haven't looked at yet. So I'm going to call this thing rental application. And we're going to make sure we put it in the existing menu that we already selected. I can do things like, I want to auto-number this, and I want to give it a prefix of app for application. And then I'm going to do this thing called table extension. So I'm going to say that this extends the task table. And this is a really critical and core concept in application development in ServiceNow. This allows us to inherit all of the functionality of the parent table that we're extending. So task in particular is a table that is leveraged by quite a few ServiceNow applications. So when you start using ServiceNow, everything from incidents to HR to just a whole variety of things will extend task. And as an application developer, I can extend this as well and take advantage of that functionality.
Sorry, can I jump in? So this is particularly important because what you may have is I was at Cox Automotive. They had like 24 different lines of business. There may be an application that you build that's sort of like, complaints, right? Every group has, they handle complaints differently. If you have a table that's like my complaints table, and there's sort of a base set of functionality that somebody builds, but every other group has a slightly different process, you can all extend off of that core set of data, that core set of business processes, and then make tweaks that are unique to your line of business and it all just kind of works together.
So this is a way for a business to also dramatically reduce the duplication, first of all, of the data and of the processes. So an onboarding system or, whatever kind of system, there's so many different business units are going to do the same thing. Here you can just very simply link across business units and but yet tweak it.
Yeah, which is important also from like a visibility and a reporting perspective, because that data I can look at holistically right now because it's all extended off of that core table. Right, when I do a report, I can actually look at all of that data together.
And it would help to aggregate information. So, for example, something like complaints. You may be a bank and you'll have mortgage complaints and you'll have credit card complaints or something. If they, even though they're separate business units, if those complaints can be aggregated into a simple system, you'd have a better holistic view of your complaints, for example.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Question on a couple of questions. So one is you're extending the table. Can I override fields to do something different from the default behavior?
Yes. Yeah. So there's this idea of what we would call a dictionary override, but basically what we can do is we can say, maybe the base table has a certain list of drop-down values, or maybe there's logic that's happening against that. We can override that. There is also, this is something that a developer has to think about at times is the thing I'm extending what I want? And so, we have to make sure that it's appropriate for that particular use case. But extending and overriding is absolutely part of it, yes.
Cool. So all 9 different business units will do exactly that, and they'll all have different processes in about 3 minutes. So the other question I have is around version control. So if I'm writing this application and I want to make some changes, if I then deploy that to production and go, oh, actually that was bad and I shouldn't do that and I want to go back, does this do that kind of... It's more a traditional development process where you have version control, you check in code, you do bits and pieces.
Yeah, so
tracking, which tends not to happen in these 4GL type.
Yeah, so don't.
Come on.
So you can manage things. So there's 2 different things that you're managing. One of them is the application bundle itself, right? Do I want to roll back to a previous version or uninstall that application, right? And then there's the application files, right? That's like the code management that you're talking about, right? So you can use, if you can just drop down source control there.
Because there are
Just
2
to
different...
illustrate, you can actually use Git as an example,
Yep.
right? To store your application files, so you can do things like branching, and like go like, okay, I'm working on version 2 here, but version 1 in production has a problem. I want to stash what I'm working on right now, roll back to version 1, push a change up to production that's a fix of that application. Those are all things that you can do.
So so Git support is pretty cool because Karen will enjoy this as well, because there's data versioning and schema versioning
which
can
is
be quite
different.
separate from application behavior, and you want to keep them separated because that's how we model view controller type architectures are. They're there for a reason.
Yep.
Okay,
and then we if you want to get into the kind of DevOps conversation a little bit and like what's supported there, like, so we don't just have sort of code management and application management. We also have things like we have an automated testing tool that's built in, so that where you don't have to write any code to test how your application works, right? So you can just configure and say, I expect this screen with this form when this data is inserted. I expect this thing to happen, and then you just add test steps. You can do API testing. You can have it run ad hoc on a schedule, test suites, right? All that kind of stuff that's just available, and that's no extra charge for any. And that's probably not something that was around when.
Well, I mean, I guess that this is new, but I guess where I was going to kind of go with my question is, this is interesting in terms of building a database and collecting information, but are you going to talk about how you then use this to automate business processes?
Yeah.
Okay.
Get to that.
Because to me, I can do this in Access, right? I can do this in a number of different tools. This to me isn't exciting, right? This is, I don't know, maybe other people have different perspectives, but this can be done in any number of ways. This isn't where ServiceNow shines. I think where ServiceNow shines is if you can take this and do something to automate a business process.
Yep, and that's where we're going to go.
Okay, great.
Yep, we'll go there.
Lovely.
and we're going there soon. So, so the rental application table that I'm building right now, one of the things that we'll notice is I didn't create any additional fields. We have 66 fields available to us here, and these are things like approvals and durations and whatnot. But I can also then say I've extended this table, but I need my own fields that are specific to this table, and that's where I'm going to go now. So I want to track a couple of things about the applicant. I need to track the property, and so now we're doing a reference to the table we just created a moment ago. So we're going to say every rental application has a link to the rental property that we're applying for. We want to track, what's the first name of the user applying, what's their last name, some basic information about them. We want to track email, credit score, and finally we want to track the applicant's age. So we've got all this stuff. We'll go ahead and save this, and this is applying, again, this is generating the necessary columns and things in the back end. If I go back to my main interface, I'll refresh. I'll go to the rental property. There we go. So now we have rental applications. So if I click New, you can see that we've got a default form. Again, this form isn't what we want, so I'm just going to go ahead and override that. And this form layout is going to be specific to this application. So I don't want some of these default things. I don't really care about tracking about priority and things like that. But what I do want to know is what are they actually applying for. So we want to bring out the property. We want to bring out their name. We want to track what's their credit score. Email. And then finally, some of the things that we do want to take from the task tables, we want to track an approval. So approval is something that I didn't create. This is something that is core to task, and it's something for task-based applications that we can leverage, so we'll see that. We also want to track additional comments and work notes, so we want to be able to have a log of things that are happening about this application. And then finally, we want to have a list of activities. So what are the things that have happened to this record that a user might be interested in seeing? So we'll save this. We'll go back to our main form and reload it, and things are looking a little bit more customized to what we've got. So again, we can take advantage of the fact that we now have a reference field here. I'll select a property. I'm not going to fill out everything here just in the interest of time, but I can save this record. And now you can see that we have stuff like this activity view. I can add comments and post those and that sort of thing, and that's just sort of part of this. But now we're at a point where we can log rental applications. I've got this approval dropdown. This is not yet requested. We need to automate this. This is something that obviously by itself, it makes no sense to leave it like this. Somebody would have to come in here and manually say, I'm requesting approval, and it's just not useful. So at this point, we're going to get into workflow. And workflow is extremely powerful, and really this is what allows us to sort of orchestrate and automate these approval processes or task-based decisions that need to be made. And instead of trying to explain workflow abstractly, I'm just going to dive in and show you what that looks like. So we're going to call this thing the rental approval workflow. We're going to make this thing run on the rental application table. There we go. And then we could define when we want this to run conditionally, but we're going to say we want this to run on every rental application that gets submitted. So this is our default workflow canvas. We have a simple, it's kind of like a flow chart. It starts and it ends, and we want to start dragging out some things to start doing stuff. So on the right-hand side, we have a list of activities. These are things ranging from ask a user for approval, or do an if statement, or do a switch. And we're just going to do a couple of simple ifs to make some decisions. So the first thing we want to do is we want to say, is the credit score above the approval limit? And essentially what we're asking here is, on the incoming application, is the credit score greater than or is field, so we can actually compare to another field dynamically. We're going to go to the property. So we're going to go to the property table, and then we're going to select the credit score approval limit field that we created before. And in sort of this natural language way, no code, we're just saying we're comparing the incoming record to the property that it's associated with. And if this thing is true, it's going to go down the yes path. If it's false, it's going to go down the no path. So now we have the ability to automatically approve if the credit score is high enough. So at this point, we're going to drag out this thing called an approval action. And an approval action allows us to mark a task as approved or rejected or otherwise. And the action is mark task approved, so we'll do that. And then we also want to give some feedback to the user. So we actually want to let the user know that we approve this. So we're going to drag out an activity called set values. And we're going to say set approval comment. And we can set a value in the additional comments field that came from the task table. And we're going to say congrats. And I'm not going to come up with a more flowery message right now, just so we can get through this. And so if it's above the limit, we approve it, and it's done. Everything's happy. We're good to go. The next thing we want to do is the opposite case. Is it so low that we just want to automatically reject it? We're going to pull out another if statement. Say credit score below cutoff. And this time we're going to compare it to the other field that we're tracking. So we're going to say less than field. Again, we're going to go off to the property table. And we're going to select the credit score cutoff. And so what's going to happen in this case, if it's less than this amount, it goes to yes path. If it's not less than this amount, it goes to no path. So we're going to reject this. Drag out our approval action again. We'll say reject. We'll say mark the task as rejected. And again, we're going to get some feedback to the user. And we're just going to say the additional comments are sorry, this was rejected.
You can create any tasks you want, maybe not through this demo, but like I could bang up against an API or something to check something.
Yeah, absolutely.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and so
Does that require the coding?
So it depends. There are some things where you might want to break into code, but there are also, we don't have an orchestration component in the demo today, but there's an entire orchestration platform that's really around dealing with interactions with other systems and simplifying REST API calls.
We clarify, there's not a separate orchestration platform. There's a set of orchestration activities that you can use that aren't in this instance right now, but our customers can, it's a separate licensable product that you have to activate that allow you to do things like, make external API calls without having to write code. It's just sort of a configuration experience if you want to make a RESTful call or something like that.
So is there an option here that's just like JavaScript and you throw it in there and you can write whatever JavaScript you want?
Yeah.
So I can just drag out a run script activity, and I've got a script box, and anything I put here can access any of the APIs in the platform, and I can go from there.
Got it.
So it really
that
scales up.
That doesn't require an extra license, right? You can do that with any of these. If you want to do it without having to actually write the code, that's an extra license.
Yes.
Yep. So we've got our automated paths now, automatic approval, automatic rejection, and at this point we want to actually get a user involved. So we're saying it's somewhere in the middle. We don't know if we want to approve it. We don't know if we want to deny it. We want to get the landlord to weigh in on this. So the last approval action we're going to drag out is, we're going to say mark the task as requested. So we're going to say request approval. And we're going to let the user know again. And we'll see in a few minutes why it's important to put these comments in here. Additional comments. And we'll say your request is pending landlord approval. And then we're going to pull out this thing called the approval user action, and this allows us to engage a user. And what we can do here is select contextually from the incoming record. We can actually just sort of explore this tree of fields. So here's the rental application. We're going to go to the property, and we're going to just select the landlord field off the property. So we're not coding to go and look this up. We're not sort of writing scripts to go figure out who this is. We know who it is because they're related to the current record. So we'll submit that. I'm just going to wire these up and drag a few lines out. Try not to let my OCD about how these things, where these lines go, get the better of me. And we're going to say if the landlord rejects, we drag it down to the existing rejection path that we already defined. And if they approve, we're going to drag it up to the approval path that we already defined. And at this point, we've got our basic process. So I'm going to publish this workflow. This makes it available to everyone in the system. And I'm going to test it. So this is going to be really the true test of live coding this. So let's go ahead and create a new application. We're going to go and let's pick this 1547 Milwaukee. We can hover over it, and we can see that if the credit score is above 650, this should automatically get approved. So let's say it's 651. I'll save. And we can see that the approval automatically went into an approved state. We get that congrats message that I put into the workflow. I'm just going to quickly go through the other cases here as well. So again, we'll just say some impossibly low credit score, and this thing gets rejected. And then finally, we'll do something in the middle. So we're going to, so we need this to be, let's say 550. And at this point, it's going to go into a requested state. So approval is requested. It says your request is pending landlord approval. And if we hover over this, we can see that Able Tutor is the landlord. So I'm going to just for a brief moment, switch over to, I'm going to be Able. So I'm going to log in. And let's see if I'm already logged in. I am. And what I can do now is I can go to this approvals module. And what's interesting about this is I didn't build this. This was something that is, approvals are a core system-wide concept. And so Able now has this thing in his queue to approve. And I can open this up. I can see information about it. And now if I'm just going to move this down here so we can see both windows at the same time. I'll approve this as Able Tutor. And then over on the main record, we can see that that change immediately comes through. So the workflow ran, he approved it, we can see information about it, and there we go. So at this point, we've got a basic business process that is really tying all of this together. So the next thing before I get into sort of the UI side that we showed before, so I know we're actually running kind of short on time, so I'm just going to speed through the API part. So two things. One is, at this point, we have this whole process. I've not written a single line of code. And as a developer, again, who's built many other applications, the fact that I'm in here just sort of focusing on what I want to build instead of the plumbing and all the other stuff, is pretty powerful. The other thing is, we might want to integrate this data with some other system. And looking at this from the standpoint of someone who maybe isn't a professional developer, they may or may not know how to deal with APIs. And so ServiceNow has APIs baked into the platform. Every table has an API. And what we can actually do is we can leverage this in our application to integrate without having really built anything to integrate. So I'm going to go to the rental property table, and I'm going to open up what we call the REST API Explorer. So we can click Explore REST API. This is a tool in the platform that lets us interact with and experiment with APIs in ServiceNow. So I can say I'm going to modify a record, and specifically I'm going to modify a record in the rental property table. I'm just going to pick a property. So let's go to, let's pick this one, 1665 West Fullerton. I'm going to copy the ID for this just to build out our test. I can then build a payload. So I can say, hey, I want to set the status field. So I'm going to set the status field to occupied. Now, I could send this directly from ServiceNow, but what's actually, I think, more useful is I can generate code for other systems. So maybe I don't really know how to build this API call, but I'm just going to generate a curl call that would be compatible. So I'll click curl. I can select the snippet, and this is really what it's doing is it's going out to an endpoint. And let me just situate things here, and I'll pull up a terminal window. And I'll paste this, and we're just hitting in this table API endpoint. We're passing in a little bit of information and data, and then let me just update the username and password, and I'll run this. And as soon as this runs, you can see that the status changed immediately to occupied. So at this point, we've successfully interacted with this thing with the APIs that are built in. I didn't really have to do much to get there. And so in our hypothetical scenario, we might have a rental property company that wants to come in and maybe they want to manage the state of specific units or whatever the case is. And so we could just hand them the API that's there and they're ready to go. So with that, I'm going to move into the UI portion of things. So what we've seen so far, what we've built so far, this is really the fulfiller interface. This is the interface for the property manager, for the landlord. But we want to get that that friendlier user experience that we saw at the beginning. So how do we actually make this look more like end users are expecting this thing to look? And so this is where we get into Service Portal. So Service Portal allows us to put a layer on top of this. And it allows us to build applications and user experiences, and perhaps it's because you want specific branding or you want to build this pixel-perfect interface that matches something that's already in the organization. Service Portal is going to enable us to do that, so that's what I'm going to jump into now. So I'm going to create a portal.
So while he's jumping into that, there's kind of like 3 different ways that people sort of start depending on how they think. I think to your point, Tim, is like if you're, on the data side, while that's not necessarily exciting, there are a lot of people who think more in terms of what's the data structure of the thing I want to build first. There are people who more think about what is the process that I want to automate first, and they can start there. And then there's this, which Josh is going to show, is you can also just go straight to what is this application going to look like, and then I could sort of build out the back end later. So there's kind of just depending how people think about building, you can kind of enter into the build experience from those 3 points, right? Either the data, the logic, or the user experience.
I have an opinion that there's only one right way to do that, but that would just be me. Go ahead.
Are there sort of don't be stupid security things built into
That's
this?
what I wanted to know.
And not security from the platform, but if it's so easy to write an app that you can link across your businesses, it could be very easy to, pull in, data, medical record. I don't know if medical records would be, but something that you wouldn't really want shared so nicely, but so easy to do that. How do you sort of corral some of the sensitive data?
Yeah, so every application and the tables that get built will auto-generate roles. So if you build something in HR and it has tables in it, anybody that wants to access any of that data has to have that role, and that's something you have to hand out to them to be able to do. If you want to get granular, at the application level, you can go in and say what other applications can do and how they can interact with your application, both from a data perspective as well as can they make an API call into one of my scripts, right? So I can say like everything is totally private. No other application can query my data, and they can't call any of my, I might write a script that has a method in it. I want to lock everything out. You can also, and this is important for security and sort of HR use cases, is you can also, when an application is in production, as the IT administrator, HR doesn't really want that person to be able to see the data, right? That IT admin has access to go and look at paychecks and social security numbers and all those types of things. There's a concept of an application admin, which is IT basically hands over admin rights to the HR group if their application in production, so they can't see anything inside of that application.
So that's kind of, and I get that we don't have time to do a deep dive into your security features, but when I think of data security, I think of column level, row level, right?
Yep.
So that's much more granular than what you talked about, as well as things like data masking, so that some users wouldn't get to see social security number, but they might get to see the last 4. And it's those types of questions that I think would go to just what granularity of security and what type of security and privacy features there are.
Yep. I'd
Yeah.
love to go into that.
Yeah.
We've done a lot of work there, and that's, so. But like you said, time.
I know.
The short answer is there is column level, row level, getting down to that level that certainly that is there.
Good.
So I'm going to just build out this portal, and the first thing I'm going to do is I want to create that home page that we saw a minute ago. And so I'm going to create a page. I'm going to call this thing rental property home. Again, you can tell that I've never built this in this instance before or practiced this demo at all. And what we've got here is the Service Portal Designer. So this is a user interface for someone building portals. And what's interesting about this is as we look on the left-hand side, we see this set of layouts and widgets. And these are things that we can just leverage out, from the base platform. And if you're a web developer who's familiar with Twitter Bootstrap, this grid layout is actually Twitter Bootstrap. This is aligned to the Bootstrap grid layout. And so if you're familiar with that, or if a developer is familiar with that, they're kind of right at home with what we're seeing here. So I'm going to drag out a container. And actually, I already have a container. So I'm going to drag out a 12 wide layout here. I'm also going to just set a couple of things up. I want to set up a fluid layout so this thing goes to the entire width. And as I build this out, you'll see that most of the things we're interacting with here are just a matter of simple configurations. On the left-hand side, we have a list of widgets. We have all sorts of widgets. So I could actually go here and I could say, let me bring in a list of records. So I'll bring in a simple list. This is a widget that comes with the platform. I can then configure what do I actually want this list widget to be. So I want to say I'm going to go out there and get rental properties. And I want to set the address to be the display field. And there's a whole bunch of other parameters and properties that I can actually configure about this particular widget. But I'll go ahead and save that. And then if I preview this page, here I've got sort of this simple default list widget that I can put out here and then I can customize. But for our use case, we wanted that more pixel perfect, sort of that grid layout that we saw earlier. And this is where this kind of highlights another interesting thing about the platform and really building service portals in general. I'm a backend systems guy. I really have more of a history of building integrations. Most of the code that I write is code that people don't see. And I'm not exactly great at CSS and things like that. And so what I'm able to do is sort of delegate the development of some of those things that maybe aren't in my skill set to someone else. And what we're going to do is actually use a series of rental widgets that have been created for that purpose. So the first thing I want to do is look at what a widget is and what it looks like. So I can actually drag out this rental map widget, and this is the map that we saw earlier. I'm not writing that code in this case. This was something that I was, basically a reusable sort of map widget we're able to use. But if we actually look at the anatomy of this, this is really what developers expect. So we've got our basic HTML template. We have our client script, and in this case, this is Angular. So this client script is actually an Angular controller. And we have a little bit of a server script, and the server script allows us to retrieve data and send that back to the user. So there's a little bit of code here. This is actually the most code we've seen up until this point. But really what it comes down to is that we're able to leverage these things very easily. In this case, I didn't really need to even understand the code as much as just add it to my portal. So I'm going to go ahead and get rid of this rental properties list because I want something that looks a little bit better. So I'll drag out the property list widget. And then finally, actually that's not what I wanted. I want search results widget. And then finally, I'm going to drag out this rental search widget, which gives me this input box. And again, if we were to look at any of these are just following that same pattern where we have a snippet of code, we have a bit of controller code that's actually rendering that, and nothing crazy going on. So if we click preview, we have now sort of that UI that we saw earlier coming into being, and this was just in a matter of being able to drag those things onto the form. So at this point, I want to be conscious of time. I don't know if we need to sort of morph.
Yeah, I think we have to move into the sort of demo pod section.
Yeah.
So I think that was kind of it, is showing the user interface experience. So
yeah,
I think was the sort of summary of it. This is super easy for business people to not even have to call IT. They can write their own apps. It's drag and drop, clicky, and you can come up with something that looks pretty good at the end. You may need to get some IT people involved in some of the code things for display, but hopefully not.
Yeah, there's a whole list of components that are there available for you to use to build great user experiences. And if you need, you can delegate out building something that's more pixel perfect, and that thing is then reusable for everybody that wants to use that in their application as well.
So a question on that. Given that you're now providing all of the control to the people who are doing that, that means that they have all of the responsibility for everything that they get wrong. All right, but also wrong. So some things like, for example, if I decide that I'm going to use age as a field because I don't know better.
Yep.
This isn't really a criticism, it's a warning, I guess.
Yeah.
With great power comes great responsibility. So if you as a business decide to go down this route, then you need to invest in the people who are designing these applications, which are going to be customer facing or which will affect individuals, to understand some of the nuances and details that don't bite you on day one. It's like you can spin up a demo and it's like, it's awesome. It'll bite you on day 97 when you realize that you were doing something like using postcode as part of your risk analysis for whether you'd give someone a loan or not, and were accidentally racist.
Yeah.
And we see this a lot in machine learning and things as well. People have managed to build not Asian all the time. And so, because some of the details here are not immediately obvious. So there is domain expertise that, people say IT is bad for a whole bunch of other reasons. Professional developers do actually provide value. They're not.
I would say data architects, but yeah.
Data architects as well. So there is domain knowledge, which is very, very useful. So I would caution saying that, hey, we can just throw away all of that IT and never have to do with any of it again. Cool. Everything is now your problem.
Yeah.
Which won't happen.
And which is a risk for businesses. So yeah, and also for you guys as well, if you're going to be aiming more at the business rather than IT, part of that's going to be a learning exercise for them, because otherwise they will do all of this great stuff and then come back and just go, but you said it'd be cool.
Exactly.
And we
Yep.
shot ourselves in the foot. So.
Yep.
Yep. Like that's true. Like it doesn't matter. It's a platform. It still needs data governance and data security and data protection.
Don't do stupid stuff.
Well, we can't hope for that. But let's know when we do stupid stuff.
Do less
Stupid stuff. Engineer out the stupid is what I say.
And there's like, if you look at it and you think, okay, IT is truly going to enable the business to do digital transformation by opening up the ServiceNow platform to the business. We provide a lot of controls and things like delegated development that allow you to hand out development spaces that people can work in, where you can sandbox what they're capable of doing inside of that application. And it's not going to stop people from building terrible user experiences.
That's right. It can't.
Yeah.
Right.
Or things like making zip code an integer, like things like that, where they don't understand the implication of calling a leading zero field an integer.
And you can take it too far, which I think Ben and some of us have been chatting in back channel, which is then IT becomes the department of no. Security as well. It says, well, you can't do that. It's like, what are you attempting to do? Let's find you a way to do that securely, rather than just going, no, you're not allowed to do that.
This is abstracting code, not IT, really, in the long run.
Yep.
And that's a good trade-off, is there still needs to be protections and security and all that stuff that no platform's going to be able to.
We see a lot of customers set up like a central governance,
Yeah.
right, in IT, where they say, okay, the business gets to build, but then there's like a governance process around
There has
everything
to
that
be.
they build. And they do like a central kind of platform team that owns it, kind of.
Yeah.
It's a human management issue rather than a technical problem that we write code to solve.